For fans of extraction shooters or simply the idea of them, VAIL VR could very well be the answer to every problem we have in this subgenre of gaming, because of Axelab's recent announcement of VAIL VR's very own extraction mode coming to the game. And with only one true PvP extraction shooter currently available in VR, what this news means to so many fans of the genre is likely far bigger than you even think. And what do I mean by this exactly? Well, let's start out with the fact that there are so few games actually tried and true in this type of gameplay loop, and a large majority of them, even ones from huge gaming studios, have ultimately failed. And does that show that this type of gameplay loop isn't something that people want? The answer to that is a resounding no. I believe that this only proves that this type of game is extremely hard to nail down properly, and there's a multitude of factors of moving parts that reside in the reason why. So today I would like to discuss 3 huge reasons why I'm worried about VAIL's upcoming extraction shooter mode, and what the game could do to make this the greatest first-person shooter experience in VR to come this century. So let's talk about why extraction shooters have become such a buzzword in the first place. Well, speaking from my very own experience, it's almost like I've grown up watching a massive shift in shooter games. When I was in high school, Halo had just released, along with many Call of Duty titles. For me, that was the first time I experienced team deathmatch and things like capture the flag, eventually search and destroy becoming a thing, and all of these had small maps with quick rounds to beat the enemy team. When all of this eventually led into a little game called Fortnite, that was my first experience with a battle royale, adding in a large map with more numerous players fighting to be the last one in an ever shrinking hazardous circle closing to the center, adding a layer of risk to the actual gameplay itself. Now right then and there, I identified something that was so crucial in a game and why it blew up so massively, and that is because the stakes felt extremely high when you were playing a battle royale. Only one person out of all the people in this huge map had to take advantage of their environment and the tools and tactics they had to best everyone else. But at the end of the day, that was it. That was the only risk to losing in this type of game. Of course, this genre blew up into Call of Duty, and they tried out Warzone, which was hugely successful, and many other games jumped on board. But then in 2017, another very little game happened to pop up, and this was a dev team out of Russia, and they happened to stumble upon my absolute favorite genre when it comes to first-person shooters, when they were actually trying to fund a completely separate single-player game called Russia 2028. And this temporary game that they were going to use to fund that game was a little something called Escape from Tarkov. Now, what we all know by now is Escape from Tarkov popularized the subgenre of extraction looter shooters, and this game up until today has become a household name, and despite all of its problems and issues, and is still on top as the greatest first-person extraction shooter we have till date. And after 10 years of being ahead of the curve, and the popularity of Escape from Tarkov only growing, larger game studios tend to take notice and began to brainstorm a myriad of reasons on how to capitalize on it. And after several failed attempts, this brings us to where we are today, and has inspired me to make this video about the major downfalls I don't want to see VAIL go through. Because the lesson we should all derive from the short history of extraction shooters should have taught us by now that this formula isn't just purely a winning one for being an extraction shooter alone. So what made Ghosts of Tabor avoid this pitfall, being that they became so popular, creating an Escape from Tarkov-like experience in VR? Well, simply put, for the straight fact that they're basically copying and pasting Escape from Tarkov's fundamentals straight onto their own game. Now, I'm not going to get into a debate on whether that was wrong or right, or, you know, copying ideas or blah blah blah, but I'm just purely stating that they took the most important things that made Escape from Tarkov work so well and put it right into their own game, with no serious deviations by any stretch of the means. Which brings us to the first reason of why I'm worried about VAIL's extraction mode, and that is reinventing the wheel. Now, in no way do I know how they're going to do this, but I do have confirmation that they're going to go about this extraction mode very differently in how Ghost of Tabor does, therefore bringing us to this very problem. Everybody knows you can't reinvent the wheel, and in such a creative space such as video games, video game development, you can quickly make this wheel look like anything you'd like, and accidentally turn it into a square, or a triangle, or a hexagon, making it not work at all. And I know Tropical is watching this right now and he's thinking to himself, Jesus Christ, if I had $1 for every time people told me about how the video game industry worked, I'd be far richer and be able to fund a far larger game than this. But I'm sorry. This is just an opinion piece and it's just my thoughts and I don't mean anything by it. So I'm going to quickly move on to my 2 other reasons and hopefully they help me elaborate on this first point. And I want to start off by what makes VAIL such a good experience in the first place. By solving a problem that's plagued the VR industry for a long time now, and that's jank. This game just works. By quite a long shot, VAIL is the best VR shooter I've ever played, ever. I've said this before, but it feels like I'm playing a game 10 years from now, and it makes me excited for the future of gaming. But despite this being such a strength for VAIL, how come Ghost of Tabor still prevails as such a popular title, being as janky as it is, especially when you compare it to a game like this? And this brings us to my second reason of why I'm so worried about VAIL's extraction mode. I'm wondering if any of you have ever heard of the expression, as wide as an ocean, but as deep as a puddle. When I play many other extraction shooters, such as DMZ, Arena Breakout, and even so recently as Delta Force, I feel like they've spiked Tarkov in a way where they've addressed that game's exact issues and fixed them for themselves. Not only that, but they have sprawling, beautiful maps with many quality of life features that makes it easy to modify your weapons in what it feels like a cheater-free zone with very few bugs to contend with. And that does feel quite refreshing. So how come do I keep coming back to Tarkov and I cannot log as many hours into any of those games than I can of Tarkov? And that is because of the substance of Tarkov. Despite its many bugs and jank and horrible quality of life features, Tarkov's depth gives it longevity, and the amount of things and choices that you have as a player in the game feel endless. There's a multitude of enemy types and enemy factions that you can choose to fight and reap unique benefits and rewards from them in any given map or raid that you enter, or you can choose to avoid them altogether to scavenge the map and just leave, making that its own unique challenge within itself. Tarkov has 11 different bosses that all have different playstyles, again, different rewards and a different situation every single time. There are a multitude of main quests and side quests that you can accomplish or not. That is entirely up to you as a player. There is a map where it requires you to have a rare keycard to even enter, and within that map has other rooms within it that requires other rare keycards for you to enter that are all acquired through different ways, whether it's through missions, rare loot spawns, or those many different bosses that I was mentioning earlier. There's an absolutely mind-bending cornucopia of loot, ranging from completely useless to extraordinarily rare or useful for a hideout that you need to build throughout your career as a player in the game, or you can take that loot and sell it for a ton of money that you can buy better equipment and weapons with to fight those challenging bosses or other players that are within the raids. And we all know those players that are really just in these games for that loot, for that money, for that cash. And all of this stuff that I mentioned has no guarantee to be in any of the raids that you actually enter, adding a massive element of spontaneity when going through the game and forcing the player to think on his feet in a highly free-formed way. The choices you have as a player makes it feel like you're playing a game within a game within a game within a game, quite literally a Russian nesting doll of a game, but in a way where everything ties in with each other and adds to the success of your playthrough. Everything you do in the game is like a symphony of options that add to the overall experience you're having. Am I saying that VAIL needs to be exactly like Escape from Tarkov? No, I'm not. I'm just saying that an extraction shooter should give you choices, have free-form gameplay, and have layers like an onion. These are only a few of the fundamentals that make an extraction shooter so fun. But the last one is the most important of them all. And this is my third and final reason I am worried about VAIL's extraction shooter mode. And that is how they decide to implement risk versus reward. If this is done properly and taken seriously in your game, I feel like you could absolutely come up with something new and it still be an incredible experience. The idea that you have to risk something for a far greater reward in a video game manifests itself in a highly addictive gameplay loop, as long as you keep the aspect of risk versus reward at the pinnacle of a strategic factor in your game mode. And I believe lack of understanding this philosophy in other games have caused them to fail entirely. The most notable in my mind being DMZ, which is Call of Duty's first crack at this extraction shooter mode. Whether or not you like Call of Duty is besides the point. It's a great game with amazing shooting mechanic and decades of development in its history. When DMZ first dropped, it was an absolutely amazing experience to have Call of Duty in such a free-form gameplay loop that still has a fan base today. But the company decided to opt out with pay-to-win options and a vanilla-style gameplay loop where if you were to die, almost nothing actually happens to you. You don't lose any progression, you don't lose any equipment, and you're off to fight the next battle as you came into the first, with no risk and all reward. I believe gamers want so much more out of life, because the idea of risking something for a far greater reward makes it mean something and worthwhile. Video games being an art form and good art being something that reflects reality in a meaningful way proves this very point. Nothing meaningful nor worthwhile comes without hard work and risk. Do I think VAIL can really pull this off? I do, but there are some serious grounds that they need to be sure to cover. The most important of them all being risk versus reward, and how you balance that properly. Developing the game into something more complex can come later down the road as long as they get that initial gameplay loop right. So in my mind, VAIL has an incredible task ahead of them. But with every issue they may run into, there's an infinite opportunity behind it, presenting the exact thing they're trying to emulate in their game VAIL, an incredible risk versus reward opportunity.